What happens when a judge and defendant turn out to be childhood friends? Fate takes an unexpected twist as a routine courtroom case becomes a moment of raw emotion and second chances. Stay tuned for a story that will surprise you at every turn. And let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The scorching Atlanta sun had barely risen, but the courthouse was already a hive of activity. Judge Clara Morales took her seat at the bench, her mind focused on the long list of cases awaiting her. She adjusted her glasses and sighed, scanning the names and charges on her docket. The courtroom bustled with a mix of frustration and anxiety, defendants shifting in their seats, attorneys flipping through papers, and spectators whispering amongst themselves. Clara had seen it all: petty theft, domestic disputes, violent offenses. Nothing shocked her anymore. The bailiff called the next case, State of Georgia versus Marcus Reed. Clara picked up the file and scanned it quickly. Grand theft auto, evading police, reckless endangerment. A straightforward case. She glanced at the notes. Stolen vehicle, high-speed chase, a crash that ended with the defendant's attempted escape on foot. She sighed again. Another young life seemingly lost to bad choices. The door to the holding area opened, and Marcus Reed was led into the courtroom. He walked with a rigid confidence that caught Clara's attention. His face was unreadable, his jaw set, his eyes staring straight ahead as if daring anyone to challenge him. Clara frowned slightly. She'd seen defendants try to project this kind of defiance before, but there was something different about him. Something she couldn't quite place. "Mr. Reed," she began, her tone firm and authoritative, "you are charged with grand theft auto, evading law enforcement, and reckless endangerment. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Marcus replied flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Clara studied him carefully. He seemed detached, almost resigned, yet there was a flicker of something in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. Familiarity? Recognition? She shook off the thought and gestured for the prosecutor to begin. As the prosecutor detailed the events of Marcus's arrest, Clara's gaze kept drifting back to the defendant. There was something about him, something tugging at her memory. The shape of his face, the set of his jaw, even the way he carried himself, it all felt so familiar. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it struck her. "Marcus Reed," she said, interrupting the prosecutor mid-sentence. Her voice softened, tinged with disbelief. "Did you go to Washington Middle School?" The question sent a ripple through the room. The prosecutor paused, confused. The bailiff looked up from his post. All eyes turned to Marcus. Marcus stiffened. For the first time, his stoic demeanor faltered. His eyes narrowed, scanning Clara's face as if trying to place her. A muscle twitched in his jaw, and then his entire body seemed to sag under the weight of recognition. Marcus stared at Clara, his mind racing. The name Washington Middle School echoed in his ears, pulling him back to a time he had tried desperately to forget. He blinked rapidly, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Clara leaned forward slightly, her heart pounding. "It's me," she said softly. "Clara Morales, from Washington Middle." Marcus froze, his hands clenching into fists. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Oh my God," he muttered, his voice cracking. "This can't be. No, this isn't real." The courtroom was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. Clara's mind raced with memories of their shared past. She remembered the Marcus Reed she had known, a bright, charismatic boy who had excelled in everything he touched. He was the star of their middle school, a natural leader with a sharp mind and a kind heart. And yet, here he was, standing before her as a defendant, in handcuffs and shackles. "You were one of the smartest kids I knew," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "What happened to you, Marcus?" Her words seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. He dropped his gaze, his shoulders slumping. For a moment, he didn't speak, his hands trembling as he clenched and unclenched them. Clara's mind drifted back to the late 1990s, to Decatur, Georgia, where Washington Middle School had been a beacon of hope for its students. Marcus had been the pride of the school, a straight-A student with an infectious enthusiasm for learning. He had a knack for math and science that had set him apart from his peers. Teachers often said he was destined to do great things, and he carried himself like he believed it. Clara had been the quiet girl in the back of the class, more comfortable with her books than with people. Marcus had been her polar opposite, popular, outgoing, the kind of kid who made everyone feel special. She had admired him from afar, not just for his brilliance, but for his kindness. "Marcus," Clara said softly, pulling herself back to the present. "You wanted to be a doctor. I remember you used to talk about becoming a cardiologist. What happened?" Marcus let out a bitter laugh, his voice tinged with regret. "What happened? Life happened, Clara. Bad choices, bad company. You know how it is." His voice broke, and he shook his head. "I threw it all away." As the courtroom watched in stunned silence, Marcus began to speak, his voice heavy with emotion. He told the story of his downfall, how he had started gambling in high school, how small bets had turned into big debts, and how desperation had led him down a path he couldn't escape. "I was 17 when I started using," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Drugs numbed the pain. They made me forget how far I'd fallen." He looked up at Clara, his eyes filled with shame. "I was supposed to be somebody, and now I'm just this." Clara's throat tightened as she listened. This wasn't just another defendant. This was someone she had known, someone she had admired, and now he was standing before her, broken and lost. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had to remain impartial, but her heart ached for the boy Marcus had been, and the man he could still become. "Marcus," she said firmly, "you don't have to stay on this path. It's not too late to turn things around." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, he said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. Prison was no stranger to Marcus Reed, but this time was different. Clara's words echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. "You don't have to stay on this path." For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something other than numbness, regret, and a flicker of hope. Behind the steel bars and harsh fluorescent lights, Marcus began to reflect on the wreckage of his life. He spent hours staring at the ceiling in his cell, replaying memories of the boy he had been and the man he had become. One night, unable to sleep, he pulled out a book from the prison library, a tattered copy of The Alchemist. It was the first book he had read in years. By the time he finished, something inside him had shifted. Marcus started spending every moment he could in the library, devouring books on personal development, entrepreneurship, and recovery from addiction. He scribbled notes in the margins of old business manuals and wrote down ideas for a future that had once seemed impossible. He avoided trouble, stayed away from the prison cliques, and for the first time in his life, he dared to dream again. The day Marcus walked out of prison was surreal. The sky seemed bluer, the air crisper, and yet the world outside felt overwhelming. He had no idea where to begin, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going back to his old life. Months later, he found himself back in a place he never thought he'd willingly return to: the courthouse. This time, he wasn't a defendant. He waited patiently for Clara's session to end, nervously adjusting the collar of the second-hand suit he'd bought for the occasion. When she finally looked up and saw him standing there, her eyes widened in recognition. "Marcus," she said, stepping down from the bench as the courtroom emptied. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, a real, genuine smile, the kind she hadn't seen in him since middle school. "I came to say thank you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You reminded me of who I used to be, and who I still can be." They talked for over an hour, standing in the empty courtroom. Marcus told Clara about the books he had read, the dreams he was rebuilding, and his plans to stay clean. "I'm done being the person I was," he said. "I've wasted enough time." Clara could see the determination in his eyes. For the first time since that day in court, she felt a sense of hope, not just for Marcus, but for the power of second chances. Marcus's road to redemption wasn't easy. Finding work as an ex-convict proved nearly impossible. Doors slammed in his face, potential employers turned him away, and old temptations loomed around every corner. But Marcus refused to give up. With the help of a local reentry program, he landed a job as a warehouse associate for a logistics company. The work was grueling, but Marcus poured himself into it, determined to prove his worth. Over time, his dedication and sharp mind caught the attention of his supervisors. Within a year, he was promoted to team leader, but Marcus wasn't satisfied with just earning a paycheck. He wanted to give back. He began volunteering at a local community center, mentoring at-risk youth, and sharing his story. "I was you," he told them. "I made the wrong choices, but you don't have to." Slowly but surely, Marcus rebuilt his life. He moved into a modest apartment, bought his first car, and started saving for a future he never thought he'd have. For the first time in years, he felt proud of the man he was becoming. 5 years later, Marcus stood at the front of a packed auditorium. He adjusted the microphone nervously, scanning the faces of the young men and women before him. He was the keynote speaker at a community event for formerly incarcerated individuals, invited to share his story of resilience and transformation. As he spoke, he glanced toward the back of the room, where Clara Morales sat quietly, watching with a mix of pride and amazement. She had come not as a judge, but as a friend. "Second chances are rare," Marcus said, his voice steady and strong. "But they're real. And when you get one, you can't waste it. I didn't turn my life around on my own. Someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And if I can do it, so can you." The room erupted into applause, but Marcus's eyes lingered on Clara, silently thanking her for the role she had played in his journey. Clara sat in her chambers that evening, reflecting on Marcus's journey. His transformation wasn't just about redemption. It was a testament to the choices we make and the people who help us along the way. She thought back to the boy she had known, the man he had become, and the promise he now carried forward. Marcus's story reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place, to make a difference, even if it was just one life at a time. Meanwhile, Marcus drove home from the event, the city lights blurring past his car windows. He smiled, thinking about the life he was building, the life he had fought for. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving, and he knew that every day was a choice to be better, to do better, and to never look back. And so the paths of a judge and a defendant, once childhood friends, crossed again in the most unexpected of places. Marcus's story reminds us that no matter how far someone may fall, there's always a chance to rise again, as long as someone believes in them and they're willing to change. But what about you? If you were in Judge Clara's position, would you have handled things the same way? And if you were Marcus, would you have found the strength to rebuild your life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story resonates with you. Thank you for watching.